Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal with Aaron Mate. Valentine's Day is coming up, brought to you by the greeting card industry. So I hope everyone goes shopping tomorrow and enjoys their day. Aaron, we have been asked to do a group Om for Gaza. I know you're into meditation.
I've never pictured a live Ohm on the air at the Grayzone. I never contemplated. It doesn't seem to quit our. I mean, I am into meditation and I'm all for an Ohm, but I never contemplated doing that in a Grayzone setting. But it's a nice thought.
We got two Larry Birds for it, so. All right. I think we earned our.
All right.
Earned our keep there.
Thank you for that. I am. Thank you for that.
I and I. Everything is IRI. So yeah, we're here a little later than usual. And we're going to be joined by Steve Bannon. No, not true. We don't have any guests. We rarely have guests just because we like to keep our lineup exclusively of heteronormative white men. The Middle East, also known as West Asia. But there's big news today. There's always big news. I saw an interview with CNN's Caitlin Collins on Jimmy Kimmel or one of those. I can't even remember what the late night shows are. They're all like some USAID comedian. And she was complaining that they never know what the news is going to be. Whereas under Biden, they could actually have long weekends and then just come in and have a predictable schedule because they were reading talking points. But now the master of chaos, Donald Trump, is in there and they actually have to cover the news. And stuff is changing rapidly. There have been some huge developments today that relate directly to the book that you're working on, Aaron, about Ukraine. So, in a way, it's positive that you haven't dropped the book yet because there's so much new material and you're going to know how it shakes out. You'll have a more conclusive narrative arc here. But at the same time, it just forces you. I mean, as an author, I know how it is when you're writing about something contemporary. It just forces you to pack more and more material in, and you feel like you're never going to finish. But I think this is important because basically what happened yesterday, February 12th, was Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said something that we have been saying ever since we've been doing this podcast on Ukraine, which is that there will be no settlement and no cessation of hostilities until the U.S. gets up and tells the truth to the Ukrainian leadership and the EU leadership, which is now indistinguishable from NATO, which is that Ukraine will not be a part of NATO.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
We'll play some more clips from Hegseth's comments, which are about a week out of the Munich Security Conference, which will be pretty interesting. But Aaron, what's your initial reaction?
Well, my first thought upon hearing Pete Hegseth say that was that if Biden had been willing to say that 3 years ago this month, almost to the day, so many people's lives would likely have saved in the hundreds of thousands. Ukrainians and Russians, because that was Russia's main demand before it invaded. Yes, they put out a very comprehensive proposal, but at the heart of it was that Ukraine renounced the invitation that George W. Bush pushed through in 2008 for Ukraine to join NATO. That was the main ask, and Joe Biden refused to say it because he talked about we have this open door to Ukraine. NATO has an open door policy, and we don't take membership off the table. We're not going to listen to Russia. And because Biden refused to take it off the table, we had a war. And the reason Biden refused to take off the table is because he wanted a war. He wanted to use Ukraine to bleed Russia. And that's why after so many people were killed with Biden presiding over it, then Biden said at the end of his presidency that, you know what, Ukraine's not even ready for NATO membership because they're not democratic enough and they're too corrupt, which is funny because Biden's own family had profited off of Ukraine corruption via his son Hunter getting a lucrative energy company board seat shortly after the 2014 coup that Biden was involved in. So Biden, for the sole goal of using Ukraine to bleed Russia, refused to take NATO membership off the table. And finally, with Biden ousted from office, someone new comes in and says the obvious, that, yeah, this is crazy to promise membership to a country that is parts of which have long been part of Russia's political sphere, in which there are millions of people who identify with Russia, who speak Russian, and to try to promise membership in a hostile military alliance right on Russia's borders is folly. And finally, we're going to formally renounce that. And that's what Pete Hegseth did. Just reading the writing on the wall and no longer committed to the Biden policy of sacrificing Ukraine to bleed Russia. So, I mean, it's good someone finally said it, but so many people's lives could have been saved had Biden been willing to say this 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans know, NATO knows Ukraine is not going to be a member and they're never going to execute Article 5 on behalf of Ukraine. Europe is not going to send troops. They know it. So why were they doing this? They were dangling NATO membership out before Ukraine, as well as EU membership, to get them to dump an entire generation of Slavic bodies into the slaughterhouse on their behalf, for their profits, for the growth of NATO, and for a war which Europe wants to continue to fight. I mean, the EU is furious about this. And Pete Hegseth, I mean, he's following Trump's guidance here. He stuck it to NATO in a kind of bizarre way, but he stuck it to NATO as well in a way that I've never seen any defense secretary do.
Well, like President Eisenhower, this administration believes in alliances, deeply believes in alliances. But make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker. Thank you, and we're glad to take some questions.
So that's how he closes his remarks. We're not going to allow Trump's not going to allow Uncle Sam to become Uncle Sucker. And I heard I'm having some audio issues here.
Well, only, and you can do this as I'm talking.
When I play clips.
Yeah. Just turn off the echo. Turn on echo cancellation. But
it's on and it will. It'll improve. But I'm going to. I'll just mute myself when I play clips.
Okay. I mean, who's the real sucker though in the situation? It's not Uncle Sam. I mean, although of course this costs U.S. taxpayers a lot of money, which, by the way, Zelensky recently said he can't even account for. He said that, something like the U.S. has spent over $150 billion, but Ukraine's only gotten half of that. So he said, I don't know where the money is. But the real sucker is Ukraine and Europe, who played along with Biden's strategy of using Ukraine to bleed Russia. Let me read to you David Ignatius, Washington Post columnist, very close to officials at the CIA and the Biden administration. And this is how he recently described the Biden strategy. It was a sensible, cold-blooded strategy for the U.S. to attrit an adversary at low cost to America while Ukraine was paying the butcher's bill. So there's David Ignatius making a plain, and butcher's bill is a military term which refers to taking heavy casualties. So that's correct. Ukraine was paying the butcher's bill, taking heavy casualties just so that the U.S. under Joe Biden could attrit an adversary at low cost to America, except for, of course, well over $100 billion that could have been spent on people's needs at home rather than sacrificing Ukrainians to bleed Russians. But that's him making it plain. That's what it was. So the suckers here, contrary to what Pete Hegseth said, is not Uncle Sam. It's Ukraine that signed up for this, that let itself be used, and the European states that totally subordinate themselves, undermine their own economic well-being, undermine their own security by playing along with this. And now they're being shown their place. Trump, people are outraged that Trump called Putin first before Zelensky, but that this was always going to happen because Ukraine is not a partner. In fact, there's that clip of Trump being asked by reporters, is Ukraine an equal partner in these talks? And he said, that's an interesting question. He wouldn't even say yes. And although one could attribute that just to Trump and say that's his view, actually, no, that's been the dominant view so far. Because if Biden really saw Ukraine as an equal partner, then he wouldn't have sabotaged the peace deal that Ukraine negotiated with Russia back in the spring of 2022, which was blocked after the US and UK refused to back it up, as Boris Johnson personally told Zelensky. And this is how one Ukrainian official, speaking to the Financial Times, now describes the mood in Europe. Okay, this is what this Ukrainian official says about Europe. It's clear that everyone is waiting for Europe. Sorry, it's clear that everyone is waiting for Trump to tell them what to do, and that's correct. Everyone in Europe is now reduced to being a vassal of the U.S. and waiting for instructions from Uncle Sam, the boss in Washington. And that's the dominant mood. And what they're being told is, it's time to shut up. We don't care anymore. We spent enough money on this. And we are, I mean, this is according to their public statements, winding this down. Of course, with Trump, we always have to issue a caveat. You never know. He's very untrustworthy. He says things on a whim. For example, last week, he almost blew up the ceasefire deal in Gaza by demanding a new deadline by which everyone had to be released. So you never know. There could be something to change his mind, like perhaps a false flag, and that gets used this way. Who knows? You have to account for these possibilities. But if this policy proceeds as it looks like, then yes, this Ukraine proxy war is winding down, and it will be Ukraine and Europe to basically bear the cost of it. And already they're being told their place, which is essentially that they have none at the table.
And reinforcing your point, Aaron, here is NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, former PM of Netherlands, a European leader, waiting for Trump to tell him what to do.
Well, listen, in Washington again, NATO committed to future NATO membership for Ukraine. But it has never been agreed that whenever peace talks would start, that peace talks would end anyway and always and definitely with NATO membership. That has never been agreed. It could be, but it never was that clearly stated. What I consistently have said is we have to make sure that whatever the outcome is, we have to make sure that Vladimir Putin will never, ever try again to attack.
So, I mean, now this is the rats fleeing the sinking ship. So now Rutte's saying, oh, yeah, we never said that if there's peace talks, then Ukraine will join NATO. The whole point of this proxy war was to fight Russia for Ukraine's so-called right to join NATO. That was the open door policy we talked about earlier. And, Mark Ames pointed this out. Rutte is changing his tune very quickly because this was him not too long ago. Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever, Mark Rutte says during Kiev visit. So, and that was back in March of 2024. So not too long ago. All of a sudden, the master in Washington changes their tune. And now the NATO Secretary General says, yeah, we weren't always so firm on NATO membership, but we never said that if there's peace, then necessarily Ukraine still has to join. The whole point, and this is what Jens Stoltenberg said too, Rutte's predecessor, that Putin went to war because we wouldn't take NATO for Ukraine off of the table, because we won't do that because of the open door. So Rutte sees the writing on the wall and now is completely switching his story. And there's a lot more, there's many more examples of that we can go through.
Yeah. We never cynically dangled NATO membership as if it was some kind of Hunger Games where the more soldiers you throw into death, drive off young men against their will to the meat grinder, the more likely you'll get into NATO. You're almost there, Ukraine. You're almost there. We never continued doing that even after it was clear that Ukraine had absolutely no possibility of retaking the territory and bringing all of the NATO gooners to Crimea for the beach party on Crimea, the summer beach party that had been promised. 16 months ago, Ukraine's counteroffensive under the guidance of Mark Milley and the Pentagon totally failed. We said it here. You didn't hear it here first. Others were saying it, but you heard it here. The counteroffensive was clearly going to fail. It was, and so many lives were wasted. And it was being hyped up by Jeffrey Goldberg and Ann Applebaum on the pages of the cover of the Atlantic. That's how you knew it was going to fail. The same people who hyped up the Iraq War were hyping it up. That was it. Okay. Now Ukraine is getting rolled back in Kursk in large numbers. And there's no hope for them retaking territory. So what we're seeing from the Trump administration is a concession to the obvious. And the art of the possible, this was always possible. But what we're saying is it was preventable, and that hundreds of thousands of lives were wasted because of NATO. I mean, this is a titanic crime, and of a part with so many other titanic crimes on the NATO worst hits list: Libya, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, and the West itself. What it did to Russia in the 90s was a Vietnam level crime. So will it be understood that way in the West? No, it's going to be, they're trying to spin it against Trump as though he's retreating and that he's allowing the Nazis to win. This is the kind of liberal take. The British are freaking out right now. They're in total meltdown on their little island. They were guiding, as Kit Clarenberg has illustrated again and again with leaked documents from British military intelligence planners. The British were guiding this war and trying to drag the U.S. deeper and deeper into it with Biden's enthusiastic consent. But what will they do now? I think the Trump administration is putting Britain in charge of NATO planning, which is great. It's like, hey, we don't want anything. We don't have anything to do with this anymore. Why don't you guys actually take charge for once? Because your military is a joke. And if you're so into this, you do it. Do it yourself. We're not going to be Uncle Sucker. I don't know who Uncle Sucker is, by the way. It sounds like Uncle Ruckus from the Boondocks, but I don't know who he's talking about. But I like the spirit of it. I can't believe I'm saying it about Pete Hegseth. But total meltdown in the UK. Here's what is this? Pod Save America. This is like their attack on. This was a huge F up by Hegseth. There's no walking back his initial comments that Ukraine won't join NATO or gain back all the territory lost since 2014. He wrote Putin a big check that has already been cashed. Maybe don't make unqualified Fox News host sec deaf. This is like the idea that he was actually walking back his comments. This is not true.
Yeah, that's the new cope, is to say that Pete Hegseth has walked back his comments. He didn't walk anything back. And Trump has basically repeated, in fact, doubled down on what Pete Hegseth said. He's basically said Ukraine should never have gotten into the war and that NATO offering Ukraine membership is a major cause of the war. So I don't see Trump walking that back at all.
Yeah.
You mentioned Mark Milley earlier, and, Mark Milley helping preside over the failed counteroffensive. Well, Mark Milley saw that coming. And that's why before the counteroffensive in the fall of 2022, he called for negotiations with Russia. He said, now's the time for Ukraine to negotiate. This was right after Ukraine had made some surprise gains in 2 provinces, taken them back. And Mark Milley said, basically, this is the best Ukraine's going to do. Time to consolidate these gains at the negotiating table. But he was drowned out by Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken, and people like this guy. Progressive proxy warrior. Oh, no, sorry. This isn't the right one. Let me find here it is. Progressive proxy warrior, Matt Duss, who was one of the people to, shame progressive members of Congress when they briefly sent a letter to Biden calling for diplomacy.
His role was Matt Duss didn't play. His role was to discipline the progressive left and prevent any voice on the progressive left from rising to the fore in favor of negotiations. He was Bernie Sanders' foreign policy brain, if you can call him that.
So listen to him now. Another example of a rat fleeing the sinking ship. He says, no Ukraine in NATO was a pretty clear subtext of the pre-February 24, 2002 diplomacy by Macron and Schultz, backed by Biden. Hegseth is just making it text. There's a lot of stuff to be mad about, but this isn't it. So now Matt Duss is saying that actually Ukraine was never going to join NATO, and that Biden even endorsed that goal back in February 2022. So the reason why he's doing this is because he's been at the forefront of, as you said, Max, trying to police the left into going along with Biden. So now he wants to make it look as if Biden had the same sensible position of no Ukraine and NATO all along. Okay. So he's completely not only backing off his own position, which is attacking people advocating diplomacy with Russia and taking NATO off the table, but he's whitewashing Biden's stance as well. So he says that Biden backed calls for Ukraine to not join NATO back in pre-February 24, 2022. This is what was actually happening. This is a headline from The Guardian from January 2022. U.S. holds firm on Ukraine's right to join NATO. Okay. And this is what Antony Blinken said. We will uphold the principle of NATO's open door, Blinken said. There is no change. There will be no change. So Matt Duss, because instead of being a progressive, instead of backing up people at the Progressive Caucus who briefly called for diplomacy, he was doing the bidding of the Biden administration. He was doing the bidding of the Biden administration, and now he wants to pretend to whitewash Biden's record, who he's dutifully served, that Biden was against NATO membership for Ukraine all along, when they risked and actually provoked a war over it.
This is Keir Starmer, by the way, who's basically, I mean, his team sent staff and Labor Party apparatchiks to campaign for Biden's reelection. This is Starmer today. Starmer reiterates UK's support for Ukraine's NATO membership following US dismissal. I mean, this language was always being put out there. And it's laughable that Mark Rutte would claim it wasn't. What this is like in the Kiev Independent, which I think was a USAID funded publication, supposedly in Ukraine. So there's a tacit acknowledgement though by Duss and Mark Rutte and others that NATO membership from Ukraine was the source of the conflict. I mean, this isn't about Putin trying to reestablish the USSR. It's about preventing a hostile military alliance on its doorstep in a country controlled by outside powers. Pretty simple.
Which therefore undermines the claims they've made all along, which is that Putin is indeed tried to restore the Soviet empire and he's an imperialist. And this is all about, Russian imperialism. And we have to fight that by funneling tens of billions of dollars into Ukraine. Of course, they're walking that back now because the writing's on the wall. On the point about the UK being outraged, their problem is, why would Trump listen to them? Given the record, and this is where Russiagate ties in. UK intelligence played a major role in Russiagate. It wasn't just Christopher Steele. During the summer of 2016, UK intelligence officials were sending warnings over and meeting with John Brennan to warn about Trump's fictional ties to Russia. So they played a major part in trying to frame Trump as a Russian agent. And then there are Ukrainians as well, including an official in Zelensky's cabinet who took part in trying to frame Trump as a Russian agent back then too, who leaked that fake ledger about Paul Manafort. That came from some of the very same Ukrainian officials who are now serving under Zelensky. We also learned recently from the New York Times that Ukrainian intelligence officials helped provide information that the U.S. used to accuse Russia of hacking the DNC, which of course, as we know now from all the available evidence, was a scam. So both the UK and Ukraine's fingerprints are all over a scam that framed Trump as a Russian agent, which therefore, I mean, on top of the fact that they're already proxies of the US and they, have second-rate status, and that makes them all the less important for Trump to listen to. And in fact, it gives them a motivation to ignore because they took part in the Russiagate scam.
And a lot of those psyops and deceptions were deployed by quote unquote independent media outlets in Ukraine and across Eastern Europe that were then disseminated into the American public's media news stream through Western media. And who was sponsoring all of those so-called independent media outlets. It was USAID, which really highlights one reason why Trump is targeting USAID so aggressively. It's revenge. It's revenge for this campaign to actually delegitimize his presidency, impeach him, and paint him as a treasonous figure, of someone who actually committed the highest crime possible by colluding with Russia. It's, even as someone who doesn't like Trump, it's pretty disturbing how much money, we're talking about billions of dollars, went into creating that media ecosystem, that regime change media ecosystem that has attacked us as well.
Oh, yeah.
Lee Fong has a piece out about how USAID funded Zinc Network, which is a British intelligence cutout, attacked me as a disinformation operative who was spinning Kremlin disinformation, basically because I've been saying what we're saying right now about the Ukraine proxy war and where it was going. So that's where my taxes go. It goes to attempts to get me deplatformed. But for Trump, it was just on a massive scale.
Yeah.
It's the real. Sorry to keep
No.
in. This is the real foreign meddling scandal. This is the real election meddling scandal, not what Russia did. And the Ukrainian embassy was hosting Clinton officials in 2016.
Yeah. At the top, I think, is always AIPAC and their foreign meddling U.S. elections. But a close second, certainly framing a president as a Russian agent, that is unprecedented. And Ukraine did take part in it. And this is Trump, I think, in part getting his revenge, although I don't think that's the only motivation here. And also, by the way, since we're talking about the UK freaking out, they're also freaking out that Tulsi Gabbard's just been confirmed and sworn in as the U.S. top intelligence chief, the director of national intelligence. There was articles in UK media about how intelligence officials in the UK are freaking out. And what's their reason? What's their main reason for freaking out? It's obvious. I don't think it's Tulsi Gabbard's heterodox views on the Ukraine proxy war. It's Syria, where the UK was a major junior partner of the US in the dirty war, had a hand in the deceptions around chemical weapons allegations, which Tulsi Gabbard challenged and thankfully hasn't sold out on other issues. And of course, they're alarmed that she's now the top US intelligence official overseeing US intelligence officials. That's a very scary prospect for people that have been lying to the public for a long time about stories that Tulsi Gabbard has called out.
Well, I don't want to get too off track here from Ukraine, but the Trump administration is not, it was not very, hasn't reacted positively to the regime change in Damascus. And that is, well, we haven't either, but I think for different reasons. And one thing that needs to happen in Syria is sanctions need to be lifted regardless of who's in the leadership. The economy has been placed in an even worse situation under Ahmed al-Shara or Mohammed al-Jolani than it was under Assad, under the Caesar sanctions. Currency has been devalued by something like 200% since he's come into office. The situation is disastrous. Israel has seized its water supply. There's a water crisis. There's a food crisis. And it's going to only lead to more mass migration and more conflict unless the sanctions are lifted. But the Trump administration doesn't seem keen on that. There is a major conference on Syria coming up in Paris, of all places. It really shows who's guiding the new Syria. And Paris also being the home of the MEK anti-Iran regime change movement. But it's going to be a collection of EU foreign ministers butting heads with the Trump administration over what to do about Syria, because they're eager to support the new, what's actually a new dictatorship, an Islamist dictatorship in Damascus. And I don't know if the Trump administration, especially Tulsi Gabbard, is not. She had her words at her confirmation hearing about Jolani were as harsh as you can get. She accused him of dancing in celebration of 9/11. I don't even know if that's true.
Yeah, I don't know either. And she also read Jake Sullivan's email to Hillary Clinton. Al Qaeda is on our side in Syria. First time that's ever been said, I think, in the U.S. government setting.
But I got off track a little bit. Trump made some I think potentially historic comments at the White House and the Oval Office today. This afternoon, he's much more accessible than Biden. I don't remember seeing Biden be this available to reporters. And I think the reporters hate it. A lot of them hate it because they actually have to like go in and do stuff. But listen to what Trump said.
At some point, when things settle down, I'm going to meet with China and I'm going to meet with Russia in particular, those two. And I'm going to say, there's no reason for us to be spending almost $1 trillion on military. There's no reason for you to be spending $400 billion. China's going to be at 400 billion. We're at $1 trillion. We're going to be at close to $1 trillion. And I'm going to say, we can settle this on, we can spend this on other things. We don't have to spend this on military and I'm going to be meeting with China. You know, we were trying to de-escalate nuclear, and I was in a position where Russia had agreed and China had agreed we were going to start, and then we had a rigged election, so that never took place. But this one was too big to rig. We won by so much that it was too big to rig.
You know, I haven't heard this comment yet. He's saying that in his first term, there was an agreement with Russia and China to denuclearize or to reduce nuclear stockpiles. That's the first I've heard that. What I remember is at the end of the Trump administration, they refused to renew and they basically imposed a series of new conditions on renewal of the New START treaty, the last remaining treaty limiting the nuclear stockpiles of the U.S. and Russia, that Russia refused. And so it was Biden that at the last minute saved New START after he took office. Now Trump is claiming that they had a deal with China I mean, if that's true, that's amazing. And it would be a scandal if Biden didn't continue that. I just have a hard time believing it. But regardless, what he's saying now, like whatever happened back in his first term, if he's genuine now about denuclearizing, that would indeed be historic. But my question always for him is he actually going to follow through?
Well, he hits on a key point. Doge is going in, supposedly trying to cut government spending. I don't think that's the ultimate agenda, but that's beside the point. Trump has zeroed in there on one of the most costly initiatives to the American taxpayer, which is nuclear modernization. And if we stop this process of quote unquote modernizing America's nuclear arsenal, which can be accomplished through a tripartite treaty with China and Russia, it will save trillions of dollars in discretionary spending. And that will actually benefit American citizens. It wouldn't be used by this administration or an Elon administration to fund, I don't know, America's housing crisis when Trump is talking about building new housing for ethnically cleansed Holocaust survivors from Gaza. There's no plan to solve the American housing crisis on the table, but it could be hypothetically. So it's incredible that he zeroes in on nuclear modernization. And it also, of course, the nuclear threat or the threat of nuclear war, which is something Trump has warned about, to his credit, between the US and Russia, is real and is ignored by the entire Western media, and was the Biden administration seemed to have no concern about it at all. If I can find this tweet by Wyatt Reed, I don't have it in our notes, but he made an interesting observation today, which is that the U.S. You're muted, I think. You are muted.
About stock prices around that time. Yeah.
Which is that the U.S. military industry stocks took a huge hit today, shedding billions in market value beginning at exactly 2:23 p.m., just an hour before Trump announced plans. Well, he didn't announce plans, but he referenced supposedly pre-existing plans for joint denuclearization with Russia and China. This is Northrop Grumman. I mean, that's something happened. Lockheed, these are the 4 of the big 5, General Dynamics. And was that Raytheon? Looks like Raytheon. I don't think I have any Raytheon stock in our Grayzone portfolio, so I don't recognize it.
RTX, yeah.
So something happened that upset them. When you talk about nuclear modernization, the big 5 gets a nuclear boner.
And who was the driver of that? It was Barack Obama. After Obama initially, when he came to office, calling for a nuclear-free world, right? That was the goal. What did he do by the end of it? Authorized like $1 trillion or some crazy amount of money for a so-called modernization of the nuclear arsenal, which Ted Postal pointed out also would increase the kinetic power of the U.S. arsenal by a lot, enough to destroy the world even many times more than the U.S. and Russian arsenals already could. So that was Obama. And maybe, Trump famously doesn't like Obama, especially after Obama mocked Trump at that White House Correspondents' Dinner. So maybe, hopefully, Trump, out of spite, will undo Obama's signature nuclear modernization program. That would be a really wonderful thing for the world. And that it's a big question, though, whether he will follow through. In his first term, he talked about the military-industrial complex. He says a lot of things that sometimes sound sensible, but then he ends up doing the exact opposite under a little bit of pressure from people inside his circle and powerful people in Washington. So we'll see. But if he follows through, that would truly be historic.
Well, this is Reuters from 2017. In modernizing nuclear arsenal, U.S. stokes new arms race. I mean, there you have it. This is 2017. And what was the signal event that tipped Obama or shifted Obama away from nuclear abolition to nuclear modernization? It was the Maidan coup.
Yeah. Yep.
So it was like the neocons who had burrowed within the Obama administration, Victoria Nuland, forcing Obama's hand and forcing him into initiating an arms race, which led to the abrogation and destruction of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And so here we are. I mean, I think somehow, if a ceasefire can be achieved in Ukraine, there's an opportunity for some new discussions about reducing nuclear arsenals. That was also sabotaged by Russiagate. I mean, the Trump-Putin summit was all about talking about the INF, wasn't it? And yeah, yes,
it was certainly.
Yes, it was all about missile reduction in missile stocks, new treaties.
The first Trump-Putin or like the first Trump-Putin summits, the one that got everyone freaked out was in July 2020
in Helsinki.
Yeah, which got everyone freaked out because that's when Trump said that I have no reason to doubt that Putin's being serious when he says that he didn't interfere in our elections, and people had a freak out that Trump would dare contradict our saintly U.S. intelligence agencies, who of course would never lie to us about in accusing foreign adversaries of things. Of course not. So, but yeah, that was before Trump pulled out of the INF treaty. But the climate at the time was, Trump was talking about reaching some sort of new nuclear agreement, and also Ukraine as well, solving the Ukraine crisis. He was talking about that as well. But Russiagate completely poisoned all of that. Trump said it at the time. I remember in 2017 when he said that Russiagate is going to get a lot of people killed, and he was exactly right. It did. It completely poisoned diplomacy with Russia. It fueled the proxy war in Ukraine. I mean, Trump had a hand in this with his own policies by listening to John Bolton and pulling out of the INF treaty and sending weapons to Ukraine that Obama wouldn't even send. But overall, Russiagate completely made it impossible for him to conduct diplomacy, which is what he was elected on back in 2016.
It got a lot of people killed. Although in Washington, many people don't believe Slavs are people. So they're just bodies. European leadership, the credibility of European leadership is tanking right now among their own populations. And Macron, Scholz, new EU foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas, total fanatic, Ursula von der Leyen, their credibility will be utterly destroyed by a deal here that will end this war. And Starmer as well, not that he's got any future in British politics after this, but it will discredit the trend that they represent of transatlanticism, of neoliberal centrism in European politics. They're done with this. This is their death blow. And that's it. And so they're going to do everything they can to keep this war on life support and to sabotage Trump. The real clash now, I think, is between Trump and Europe. Now, we sound like we've been praising Trump as a man of peace. It's very clear, and Trump has made it clear, and people around Trump have made it very clear that the deal with Russia will allow a renewed pivot to Asia, to encircle China, and to potentially use hard power. I think it could make a conflict over Taiwan even more likely. That's clearly the Trump administration's target. It was also the Biden administration's target, but they thought they could fight kind of a two-front war, and they wound up forging a power block between Russia and China. And then you have Trump focusing obsessively, in a way no American president has, on the land of the Gaza Strip. And it's obvious why. This doesn't have anything to do with any grand strategy. This isn't derived from Harold Mackinder's theory of seizing control of the great world island of Eurasia in order to control the world. There's no Brzezinski thinking here about a grand chessboard. This is all about transactional, sleazy, Zionist billionaires lining Trump's pockets. And the benefit to the US, even from a cold, hard, realist, imperialist perspective, it doesn't, there's none. And there are potential serious dangers. So Trump is serious. I mean, I thought Trump was just clowning around, or he may have been clowning around, or he was using extreme language to stoke some kind of negotiation, but he appears to be serious about some kind of plan to own Gaza. And these were his comments during a meeting, what was it, 2 days ago with Jordan's King Abdullah.
You said before that the U.S. would buy Gaza, and today you just said we're not going to buy Gaza.
We're not going to have to buy. We're going to have Gaza. We don't have to buy. There's nothing to buy. We will have Gaza.
What is that?
No reason to buy. There is nothing to buy. It's Gaza. It's a war-torn area. We're going to take it. We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to get it going eventually, where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the people in the Middle East. It's going to be for the people in the Middle East, but I think it could be a diamond. It could be an absolute tremendous asset for the Middle East. And you're going to have peace. It's going to bring peace in the Middle East. Gaza, the way it is right now, every 10 years, you're going to have the same thing happening. I've watched it so long, all the death and destruction of Gaza. The civilization's been wiped out in Gaza. No, it's going to be a tremendous thing. It's fronting on the sea. It's going to be a great economic development job. It's going to put people to work, a lot of people to work. And those people are all going to be from the Middle East.
So it's fronting on the sea. It's some great real estate. It's going to put people to work. We're just going to take it. We're not going to own it. We're just going to take it because it's nothing. It means nothing. There's no people there, essentially, but they will have to be ethnically cleansed, but they have no claim to anything. And somehow we're going to take it. How? He doesn't say, but it seemed like if the U.S. would have to take it, U.S. troops would have to be involved. That's something he's putting on the table.
Well, the most clarity he offered was when one of his follow-up posts after he initially announced this, when Netanyahu was there. And he said that this was on Truth Social recently, that basically the U.S., to be clear, U.S. will take control of Gaza after the fighting ends. So I think by that he meant that after Israel basically can continues wiping everybody out in Gaza, then when there's no more resistance left at all, then the U.S. would take control of it. I don't think he would send U.S. troops to fight actually in Gaza. He's basically saying that, if I'm reading his words correctly, that he would give Israel carte blanche to basically wipe out Gaza, ensure there's not until there's not a member of Hamas left, I guess, to fight U.S. troops, and then the U.S. would come in.
Yeah, I mean, you're still going to have to do what's known as stabilization, which would at least require U.S. contractors, unless they're going to completely rely on Israel, which is not exactly known for stabilizing the situation. I mean, here's a Trump again in a follow-up, and sorry for, this is Trump in a quick follow-up question.
If it's taken under what authority? It is sovereign.
Under the U.S. authority.
If it's taken under what authority? It is sovereign.
Under the U.S. authority.
I mean, I'm not exactly sure what he means there, but they're going to take Gaza under the U.S. authority. Does that mean that the U.S. will own Gaza or will control Gaza? I mean, I thought that the Israelis and the religious nationalist movement in Israel wanted some stake in Gaza and in northern Gaza, and they wanted to build settlements there. Shouldn't they be upset by the U.S. potentially taking it under the U.S. authority? This was always supposed to be an Israeli plan, or it was supposed to be done behind the cover of one of the stooge Arab monarchies like the UAE, but he's just claiming it. There are some evidence that he's referring to an actual plan that was delivered to, I think, his National Security Council. There's a professor named Joseph Pelsman who sent Trump a study on, quote, Gaza relocation. This is the Israeli media's way of framing it. Back in July, when much of Gaza was destroyed. He's an economics professor at, of course, George Washington University's Elliott School, which is a indoctrination and training mill for the State Department located right across the street from Foggy Bottom, from the State Department building. And, Pelsman himself says you have to destroy the whole place and restart from scratch. I mean, imagine if a professor at George Washington University said you have to destroy Israel and start from scratch and take that population back to Germany, which started the Holocaust and is actually responsible for the Jewish problem. And why do Palestinians and Arabs have to pay for the crisis that Europe and the Germans caused? What would happen to them? They'd be fired immediately. But Joseph Pelsman, there's no professional consequences, and he is a participant in a genocide by furnishing this plan to Trump, which Trump appears to be referring to. I talked last week about Gaza 2035, the plan for Gaza put forward by Netanyahu. So Trump is, I think this is serious. The Wall Street Journal is referring to, is reporting that Jordan and Egypt are taking this plan very seriously. And King Abdullah himself seems to be sending out some kind of distress signals throughout this press conference. King Abdullah being basically the half British, Hashemite, Western-backed controller of what is effectively a human warehouse for Palestinians, once known as the East Bank. Watch him.
Mr. President, I truly believe that with all the challenges that we have in the Middle East, I finally see somebody that can take us across the finish line to bring stability, peace, and prosperity to all of us in the region. And it is, I think, our collective responsibility in the Middle East to continue to work with you, to support you, to achieve those lofty goals. So I'm very delighted to be here. And as you said, sir, we've got some very interesting discussions ahead.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much.
He calls him sir. He's very good. King Abdullah is on his best behavior. At the United Nations General Assembly, King Abdullah was staunch in his rejection of the forced transfer of the population of Gaza. But in front of Trump, he was very careful not to challenge him at all. And everyone paying attention to this bizarre and pretty humiliating press conference where Trump was basically saying, we are going to force hundreds of thousands of refugees onto you. King Abdullah kept blinking, and it looked like he was sending a Morse code of distress. it was such a bizarre scene. I mean, and Trump is humiliating people who will do anything for U.S. empire.
We have to keep in mind that there is a plan from Egypt to the Arab countries. So we've been invited by Mohammed bin Salman to discussions in Riyadh. I think the point is, how do we make this work in a way that is good for everybody? And obviously, we have to look at the best interests of the United States, of the people in the region, especially to my people in Jordan. And we're going to have some interesting discussions today. I think one of the things that we can do right away is take 2,000 children that are either cancer children or in a very ill state to Jordan as quickly as possible, and then wait for, I think, the Egyptians to present their plan on how we can work with the president to work on the Gaza challenges.
So Abdullah there pledges to take in 2,000 cancer-stricken and wounded children from Gaza, which is a concession to Trump, who wants him to take in loads more of Palestinians, loads and loads of Palestinians. And he puts forward his strategy with Trump, which is to have Egypt put forward the alternative proposal to stabilize and take over Gaza, probably neutralize Hamas, since Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's military junta in Egypt hates Hamas, and to allow the population to remain and initiate some kind of rebuilding process. And so Trump has, with his rhetoric, his cretinous rhetoric of ethnic cleansing, forced Egypt to put forward this proposal. But he's also forcing them into an existential bind. They cannot accept Trump's proposal at all. It will likely destroy Jordan under the control of King Abdullah. In the last round of elections in Jordan, which had very low participation during the genocide in Gaza, 32% participation or something, the Muslim Brotherhood's party in Jordan won a record number of parliamentary seats, and they are surging. They're also experiencing a resurgence in Egypt as well. And what Sisi and Abdullah demonstrated, Abdullah, who shot down Iranian ballistic missiles as Iran retaliated for numerous Israeli assaults and attacks on its sovereignty, Abdullah assisted Israel in neutralizing that attack from his own soil. What they showed is that no matter how subservient they were to Western empire and by extension Israel, that at the end of the day, Trump was going to come for them and seek to devour them. If Trump pushes hundreds of thousands of Gaza Holocaust survivors into the Sinai Desert, Egypt sees that as a direct attack, a direct threat. It will mobilize its military to prevent them from coming. The Egyptian military leadership does not welcome Palestinians. And it sees Hamas as an extension of the Muslim Brotherhood, which it needs to neutralize. So, which it neutralized by killing 2,000 to 3,000 protesters in Rabaa Square back in 2013. So this is like Trump is forcing them into the worst existential crisis. And then we have Saudi Arabia. Remember the sword dancing back in 2017 with Trump and Wilbur Ross, and Steve Bannon was like flicking out business cards in Riyadh with Mohammed bin Salman and his clique. And from the Saudi perspective, it's like they came here and danced with us and made themselves look like fools because they're so determined to have an equal, if transactional, partnership with us. Now Trump is threatening Saudi Arabia, joking about imposing Palestinian refugees on Saudi Arabia, telling them they have to get on board with his plan and that they have no alternative. He's not offering them any opportunity to come to the table. And now they see that they're not an equal partner either as the most powerful, supposedly or putatively Arab nations. And so what was the go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What was the response from the Saudi monarchy Well, here's one way of looking at their response, which was Prince Faisal, who was the longtime, we don't need to hear what he has to say. He was the longtime liaison to the CIA, basically. The Saudi longtime intelligence director. The complete friend, the biggest friend of Western empire that could be asked for. Helped negotiate Western military bases near Mecca during the Gulf War, something that was seen as an affront to Islam. And he shows up on Christiane Amanpour's show with a kufiya as a headdress. The Dawn statement, also from Mohammed bin Salman, stated that there will be no normalization with Israel until there's a Palestinian state, a rebuke to Donald Trump. And so we're seeing this kind of nationalism from the Saudis that harkens back to the days of King Faisal bin Abdulaziz, who was the king who was actually probably assassinated by his nephew because of his problematic, what was seen by the West as his problematic stance in solidarity with Palestine. His nephew had spent a long time in the United States before he killed him. But first they said he was a madman, he was crazy. Then he was judged to be sane and executed. But during the Sinai crisis leading up to the 1973 war and afterwards, King Faisal organized an Arab boycott of Israel and an OPEC and caused an oil crisis for Israel's Western backers. Not just the United States, but apartheid South Africa as well, and Canada experienced an oil crisis. And this is what the Arabs failed to do, these Sunni Arab regimes failed to do in support of Gaza during 15 months of live stream genocide. They did nothing. Nothing. It was the axis of resistance that stood up, particularly Ansar Allah in Yemen. They were the only ones who really stood up and did anything. They were the only ones who were thanked by the resistance in Gaza. Abu Ubaidah, the spokesman for the Al-Qassam brigades, the resistance wing of Hamas, the armed wing of Hamas, did not thank a single Sunni government when he thanked their partners during the ceasefire. And now here they are being put on the chopping block by Donald Trump. They're the ones being threatened. Their future as rulers is being threatened by Donald Trump because they sat down like lambs. And that's really the lesson to Arab leadership from Donald Trump is you give an inch and the West will take a mile. There's nothing you can do to possibly mollify and appease the West by shooting down Iranian ballistic missiles and taking in Palestinians and keeping the siege on Gaza. They will eventually come for you. And now Donald Trump is showing that. And it's again, another historic moment.
The Arab states have already made a really huge compromise. They've given the U.S. and Israel pretty much everything that the U.S. and Israel have claimed to want for a long time, which is and over 20 years ago, they offered Israel full normalization in exchange for Israel simply ending the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and letting Palestinians have a state in just 22% of their historic homeland. That's a big compromise for them. That's basically an admission of defeat and letting this colonial state exist on their land and letting them Palestinians have just 22% of what used to be theirs when it was called Palestine. But no one has accepted that. Netanyahu refused to even discuss it. Obama, Bush, Trump, Biden put no pressure on Israel whatsoever. And no one inside the U.S. political establishment is willing to even acknowledge that that's offer is on the table. What already is basically a surrender for Palestinians. Even members of Hamas have said that they would take that. But it's the U.S. and Israel that won't discuss it. So in the absence of that, Trump could come in with this proposal, and then you have even outlets like the New York Times pretending as if this is serious and will shake things up, when really it's just all an effort to undermine what Arab states, with even the support of Iran, have offered to Israel before. And Trump is now basically just expressing what I think no one else in Washington wanted to say, which is that, yeah, we don't see Palestinians as having any rights and they don't belong there and they should leave. And if there's any method to his madness, I think it would be to put out something so outlandish as the U.S. taking control of Gaza and then forcing, as you were talking about, the Arab states to basically take ownership of Gaza and no longer make it Israel's problem and just rule it as a subcontractor. But it's hard to tell if there's a method to his madness or if he is indeed wants to take over Gaza and do the ethnic cleansing himself. But that's like, whatever it is, it's unbelievable that someone could say this out loud, that it's okay to ethnically cleanse the people of Gaza. And I think there's a special contempt among U.S. leaders and Israeli leaders for Gaza, more so even the West Bank, because Gaza is the heart of Palestinian resistance. It always has been. And hegemons hate resistance. That's why I think we've seen this response to October 7th. It wasn't the trauma of October 7th in terms of atrocities. It was the trauma of Israel being humiliated by the people it occupies. You can't tolerate that. So therefore, you have to wipe out the whole territory and force all of its people to leave, as Trump is now openly calling for. I think he hates the fact that Israel was humiliated. Israel was defied on October 7th with force, because it's Israel and the U.S. They're the only ones that are allowed to use force, according to Trump and Netanyahu's mindset. So I think now Trump is taking out that colonialism on the people of Gaza and saying that because Hamas resisted Israel, then all of them lose their rights to live there, as if every person in Gaza is essentially synonymous with Hamas. My question for you, Max, is how is anything possible, like positive possible, if you have not only the division of Palestinians physically between the West Bank and Gaza, but the leadership is so divided? The corruption of the Palestinian Authority, who have shown themselves to be subcontractors for Israel and the U.S., to the point now where, Mahmoud Abbas is even suspending payments to the families of Palestinian prisoners, which has long been a Israeli demand, but Abbas never followed through with it, because that's such an important part of the Palestinian society, is that it keeps people alive to subsidize families whose loved ones are imprisoned by the occupier. So Abbas, under U.S. Israeli orders, has ended that. And so you have this really weak and divided Palestinian leadership, two different factions in charge, Hamas in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Hamas tried to address this by getting Marwan Barghouti freed. That was one of their big demands after October 7th, was calling for the release of someone who's not even a member of Hamas, Marwan Barghouti, but who is seen by many people as having the credibility to unite all the factions. But of course, I don't think Israel will allow that, although there's been some news recently that suggests otherwise. But certainly they've kept him in prison for this long, knowing that he could unite Palestinians. So how is anything possible when you have such a divided and weak Palestinian leadership?
Well, it depends on what's possible. Right now, there is a consensus in support of resistance, and the resistance in the northern West Bank, which is now the key target for the Israelis. After the Palestinian Authority and Abbas tried their sort of test run of crushing the resistance before the Israelis went into Jenin and Tulkarm and the other refugee camps that have been where they've lost control, the Palestinian Authority went in and tried to arrest some Palestinian quote unquote militants. They're known in Palestine as simply Fedayeen or Mujahideen, and they failed. And what they were trying to show was to the West that they can go into Gaza and do the same. But they had already failed back in 2006 when Elliot Abrams tried to send them in to coup out Hamas. They were driven out. And it will be the same. They're completely weak. They're weaker than ever before. There is a consensus in support of resistance, which means that Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank tend to support the Al-Qassam brigades, but not on a party level or sectarian or ideological basis. Not because they support Hamas, but because they support resistance. If you talk to the youth across Palestine, they'll tell you that they're sick of affiliating with Fatah or Hamas or one of the parties, more or less. Although Hamas has gained some credibility after October 7th, or gained popularity. What they support is anything that will remove the occupation, and they prioritize unity. what you're seeing in the camps in the northern West Bank is fighting across party lines, just young men fighting together. That was the point of one of the first iterations of armed resistance in the northern West Bank back in, I believe, 2021 or 2022, when the Lion's Den was formed in Nablus. They didn't represent any party. They were just about fighting occupation. And so I think that is the future, as well as challenging it internationally through boycotts, through protests. I'm seeing all kinds of new modalities of boycott taking place even in London because of the boycott of Coca-Cola, which is heavily involved with the occupation. There's a new brand on the market called Gaza Cola. So it's like a positive boycott where actually Palestinians are producing their own brands. The problem, having been in Gaza and really getting to understand the problem at its core, is what this conversation began with. The Arab regimes, the Sunni Arab regimes that have the most money, the most people, who have populations that support Palestine but prevent them from acting out on it. And what I would hear again and again in Gaza, the most anger expressed was to what they would just say, the Arabs. Where are the Arabs when we're being bombed? Where are they? And until that takes place, and Trump seems to be sort of forcing the contradictions out, there may not be a material change. We also haven't talked about Iran, but U.S. intelligence assesses, according to the Washington Post, that Israel will seek to attack Iran in the next 6 months. So it's so much of what is taking place is who's standing in the way of Donald Trump's plan. Right now, it's not King Abdullah, it's not Sisi in Egypt, it's not the Saudis or the Emiratis, it's only the resistance, and particularly inside Palestine. And we should also point out that Donald Trump promised, I kind of like left this out, this is an oversight on my part. Donald Trump promised that all hell would break loose if all hostages were not released on Saturday at 12 p.m. Now, what was going on? Hamas had declared that Israel was violating the ceasefire. 98 people have been killed in Gaza since the ceasefire. Over 800 people have been wounded by Israel since the ceasefire. Israel continually violates the ceasefire agreement, as they're doing in Lebanon. Just a few hours ago, Israel attacked Lebanon. And so Hamas announced that we will not release any more hostages until you abide by the terms of the ceasefire, which also included letting in a certain number of fuel trucks. Israel had only let in 15. I think the number was 50 per day. Caravans for people who were homeless, tents, they were not being let in. Suddenly, yesterday, the tents, caravans, fuel trucks started to flow in, and Hamas announced that this Saturday they will release 3 hostages. Donald Trump's demand was that they give up all of their leverage and just basically surrender to Israel. And Hamas, after all we were told that they lost in the last 15 months, stood down Donald Trump and the Israelis and kept the ceasefire phases back on track, with actually the help of a slice of the Jewish Israeli public, which is out there protesting for hostages to be released. They shut down the Ayalon highway yesterday in Tel Aviv. The parents and families of the captives and hostages maintain enormous sympathy in Jewish Israeli society. So Netanyahu had to bend to their will, and Donald Trump's threat has just kind of like faded away into the wind of Mar-a-Lago.
Even the New York Times had to admit that Hamas's claims that Israel was violating the ceasefire by blocking humanitarian aid that it had promised to allow in. Even the New York Times had to admit that Hamas was correct. This is from a few days ago. Ali Abunimah pointed this out. So again, Hamas said that Israel had failed to uphold its promises by requiring it to send in hundreds of thousands of tents into Gaza and other humanitarian supplies. 3 Israeli officials and 2 mediators said that Hamas's claims were accurate. So even the New York Times had to admit, for once, rather than laundering Israeli propaganda, that Hamas was correct, that Israel was blocking the humanitarian supplies that it had to let in under the terms of the ceasefire deal.
Well, and it's so prominently displayed and detailed there by the New York Times. There's no headline in the New York Times about Israel violating the ceasefire. It's always buried there.
Buried, yeah.
Even Reuters or AP would state in their headlines that Israel was violating the ceasefire by attacking inside Gaza. Will the ceasefire survive phases 2 and 3? We don't know, but it looks like it'll last to Saturday. And what is this threat about all hell breaking loose on Gaza? I mean, what is it? I know that Trump gave Israel the mother of all bombs. Why Israel needs that, we don't know. They didn't shred enough children to death. They need a bomb with something like 10 times the capacity of a GBU bunker buster. But hell already broke loose on Gaza. Hell was breaking loose every day, and they withstood it. So they have stood down Trump, and the negotiations continue. And Aaron, I think, it's not outside the realm of possibility that someone like Marwan Barghouti and Ahmed Sadat from the leftist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, who's also jailed, who's also on the list of Hamas demands for prisoners to liberate, comes out. And they would form a unity government. We also should assume that Hamas may not have wanted to continue to rule Gaza as soon as they decided to initiate the Al-Aqsa flood operation on October 7th. So we're entering, we're in a protracted war. We're witnessing a protracted war that centers around Gaza, and we don't know where it will lead. But Yahya Sinwar, who was, I guess, killed last year, he's the man of the year because he has triggered a historical acceleration that will shift so many regional dynamics we can't even predict. I don't know where to go next here. If there's anything else you want to add, we've got a few other segments teed up.
Can we move to the NED?
You don't want to do Lauren Boebert and Kid Rock?
I'd rather skip that one and the other one about the Congress member for another time, only because of time constraints.
Yeah.
But
okay,
I think
you should probably have Anya on to bash Anna Paulina Luna. And
I agree. I agree.
We'll get accused of a certain kind of shaming.
Yeah. But here's a site for sore eyes. This is a headline from, I don't think we've ever shown a headline from the Barry Weiss's outlet, the Free Press, before, but this one calls for an exception because according to the Free Press, Barry Weiss's neocon outlet, Trump is starving. Say it again.
This is by Eli Lake.
By Eli Lake.
Neocon egg and celebrator of Israeli terror attacks. Brings us a rare piece of good news.
Yes. Exclusive. Trump is starving the National Endowment for Democracy. Doge has frozen funds to the organization that was instrumental in helping win the Cold War. And there's a quote in there from someone on the inside the NED. It's been a bloodbath.
I don't think a literal bloodbath, but
yeah, I mean that's what the NED causes around the world. I mean, they should use their words carefully because they're responsible for bloodbaths in places like Haiti and Ukraine where they support coups. But this is honestly, if this is true, and I believe it is, this is a 100% positive development to come out of Doge. And there's a lot to criticize it for. For example, I don't like that they shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I think that was a bureau that does decent things for not a lot of money. And I think that was done in the interests of, corporations and wealthy oligarchs like Elon Musk. But this move, shutting down the NED, I think if you care about democracy, as the NED claims to do, falsely, is a wonderful thing because this is an organ of the U.S. government that's been used to destabilize countries around the world for a very, very long time.
I'll show you all a few minutes of a documentary I made about the National Endowment for Democracy in the early days of the Grayzone. I went to award ceremony by the National Endowment for Democracy for their Korean so-called dissidents, who they were and they held this to disrupt Donald Trump's in the peace talks that Donald Trump initiated between the North and the South. If there had been peace on the Korean Peninsula, that would have ended the NED's operations there. And but this is a brief history of the NED that was included in this documentary, short documentary I made called Inside America's Meddling Machine. NED, the US-funded org interfering in elections across the globe.
The politically benign entity advancing democracy and human rights. Its record tells a different story.
The NED drew its original leadership from a group of Cold War ideologues who had formerly belonged to the Trotskyist Social Democrats USA Party. Founded in 1983 by then-President Ronald Reagan, the NED became an international vehicle for the neoconservative agenda.
It's good to have you all here to help celebrate the launching of a program with a vision and a noble purpose.
Over the years, the NED and its partner organizations have largely served the interests of right-wing, free market parties and corporate interests around the globe.
In Central America.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. For 10 years, the U.S. supported the military attempt to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. It never succeeded. Today, the Sandinista government has been overthrown at the ballot box.
The NED's first success was the defeat of the Sandinista government in Nicaragua's 1990 elections, replacing it with the right-wing party of Violeta Chamorro. Since then, the NED has advanced U.S. interests in countless countries. It helped swing a Russian election for Boris Yeltsin in 1996. It drove a failed coup attempt in Venezuela in 2002. It orchestrated a successful one in Haiti in 2004, and another one in Ukraine in 2014, which paved the way for neo-Nazis to move into the political mainstream.
Nowadays, instead of having just the CIA going around behind the scenes and trying to manipulate the process secretly by inserting money here and instructions there and so forth, they have now a psychic, which is this National Endowment for Democracy, NED.
These words from Philip Agee, the late CIA whistleblower, were openly confirmed by Alan Weinstein, a founding member of the NED. Weinstein told the Washington Post in 1991, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA."
There's a lot of reasons, I think, for Americans to promote democracy.
NED funding has almost quadrupled since the group was founded. In the past 4 years alone, it's directed at least $4 million into parties and media outfits in Nicaragua. That prompted an NED-funded publication, The Global Americans, to boast of the role the group played in laying the groundwork for change in Nicaragua, where violent protests today threaten to topple the country's elected president, Daniel Ortega. The article went on to say that it's becoming more and more clear that U.S. support has helped play a role in nurturing the current uprisings. Another top target of NED and its Washington partners is China. The U.S. has worked closely with Uyghur Muslims, an ethnic minority group that's faced discrimination at the hands of the Chinese government, and has been used as a bargaining piece by Washington to ratchet up the pressure on Beijing. At the ceremony, I met Omer Kanat, chairman of the World Uyghur Congress, a group funded almost entirely by the NED.
The Chinese authorities, Chinese government put more than 1 million Uyghurs in so-called re-education camp. It is very similar to concentration camps.
And your group, which is sponsored by the NED, is the one that's documented this and supplied the information to the U.S.?
Yes, some of the information, of course, not all of it, yeah.
Along with the U.S.-funded Radio Free Asia.
You're muted, Max.
Omar Kanat, who runs the World Uyghur Congress, wasn't really able to provide me with any sourcing for that claim, which became the basis for the claims of Uyghur genocide. Something we heard from the U.S. State Department that denied genocide in Gaza, that it was actually carrying out. But the NED has just terrorized societies across the world. And now it's been a bloodbath there. There was a literal bloodbath in Nicaragua, thanks to them. There have been bloodbaths caused by their sponsors in Venezuela, violent street protests that have left hundreds dead. I mean, they have left a trail of blood around the world, but they claim to just be promoting democracy. And, I want to take some credit for this too, because the National Endowment for Democracy credited us, the Grayzone, with causing the biggest PR fiasco in their history. This is our report, which, continues to circulate to this day. Basically, we obtained some leaked emails that showed Carl Gershman, the founder of the NED, and all of his inner circle, which had left and handed over the reins to a group of what they called woke progressives, complaining that the new communications director at NED had engaged in this disastrous phone conversation with me and Alex Rubinstein, Grayzone contributor, which exhibited complete ignorance. And I was basically educating her about the NED's role as a CIA cutout and how it has spurred regime change, including violent renter riots from Ukraine to Venezuela to Nicaragua and Poland and many other countries in between. And she had initiated the call, their comms director, because she wanted to take issue with us calling them a CIA cutout in passing on our website. Big mistake. And then the recording caused them to freak out. We got these emails, and they said it was the biggest PR fiasco in NED history. I think the PR fiasco is much worse now that we were able to publicize their internal communications about that fiasco. And now, why would the Trump administration, which hates woke politics, which is obsessed with DEI, want to fund an organization run by woke progressives who do DEI trainings regularly, as we document in this piece, which is completely incompetent and which is promoting democracy that always leads to unintended results and often reinforces the leadership of governments like the one in Nicaragua, or in Venezuela. Why would they want to fund it? So they're not funding it anymore. Pete Hegseth said today before NATO that they're going to prioritize hard power because you can't shoot flags and you can't shoot values. I think he meant like you can't shoot them out of a gun. So that might be the end. This is the end of the Reagan era.
The first article I can recall reading by UMax was over 20 years ago. I think it was 2004, when you wrote a big expose on the role of the National Endowment for Democracy and the International Republican Institute, which work hand in hand in the coup in Haiti, causing a literal bloodbath there. And that was such an important story because it proved that the U.S. government, the Bush administration at the time, through these, U.S. government organizations, was destabilizing one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere and overthrowing Jean-Bertrand Aristide for the second time. And that's what it's been used for around the world. And this used to be common knowledge inside progressive media that the NED was up to no good. In recent years, as we recently covered, Democracy Now!, which used to cover National Endowment for Democracy critically, featured an NED-funded guest to argue against peace talks with Russia over Ukraine, without even acknowledging their funding by the NED. But this is an example of what we used to be common knowledge in progressive media. This is a Democracy Now! Story from 2006. U.S. government channels millions through National Endowment for Democracy to fund anti-Lavalas groups in Haiti. And Lavalas was the movement of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the president who was twice overthrown, because Lavalas represented the poor majority of Haiti, not the wealthy elite that the U.S. and the National Endowment for Democracy were trying to keep in power. So, this is what the NED has always been up to. And if there's now reports of a bloodbath inside the NED and they're losing their funding and they don't know what to do, and neocons like Eli Lake and Barry Weiss are upset, it's a wonderful thing. And hopefully progressive media that used to cover the NED critically, rather than bringing on its actors, its literal paid actors as expert guests, as Democracy Now! Unfortunately recently did, hopefully they can remember what the NED has done too, and not get caught up in this partisan thing where because Elon Musk is involved in this, that it's necessarily a bad thing. Unfortunately, for all the criticisms there are of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and there are many to have, cutting the NED is an unabashedly good thing for the world. If neocons are upset, it's something to celebrate.
Yeah. We should have a shirt that says that, like a Grayzone shirt that says that. We attack the NED primarily because its target is socialist and independent governments in the developing world and labor unions that can't be controlled by the US, basically governments that aren't taking orders from Western multinational companies. But we also did this wild Bangladesh story about the International Republican Institute in Bangladesh. It really was, I mean, I don't know if I want to call it one of the wildest stories I've worked on, because like every week brings a new one. But we were able to review documents from the International Republican Institute. For those who don't know, the International Republican Institute, or IRI, is a subsidiary of the NED. There's the NED, it's like the parent organization. Then they have the National Democratic Institute, which is run by the Democrats, and a bunch of Democratic operatives and some senators get on the board. Nancy Pelosi's been involved with them. Madeleine Albright was their chairperson for a long time. And then IRI, the Republican Institute, was originally chaired by John McCain. Now it's chaired by Senator Dan Sullivan from Alaska. Tom Cotton is on their board. And, they're Republicans. There's some, Never Trump, centrist Republicans, Mitt Romney, some Lincoln Project type people there. But there's also like your hardcore culture warriors, Tom Cotton. I mean, Tom Cotton, if he were from like California or somewhere else, he'd just be like he'd be a neocon Democrat. But he's a culture warrior because he's in Arkansas, deep red Arkansas. He's got to support Trump. And so he's anti-trans. I mean, he doesn't like gender reassignment surgery. He opposes biological males playing women's sports. Like, he'll introduce laws. To Dan Sullivan in Alaska, same thing. But they're on the board of an organization that was deliberately, according to these documents we reviewed, funding in their own words, transgender dance in Bangladesh, and recruiting trans activists because they see them apparently as more. They're claiming that they're trying to promote a kind of change in power. Now, the IRI has subsequently, after not responding to my initial emails about these stories, has challenged some of the language that they say was in the documents. The documents are authentic, and they haven't denied funding these activists or these groups specifically in opposition to the deposed government of Sheikh Hasina, who was said to be too pro-China, to bring in Mohammed Yunus, longtime Clinton Global Initiative fellow, micro loan shark. But they've challenged some of the language, but they won't tell me on the record which language they want to challenge. It's the weirdest experience I've ever had in dealing with them. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of what's going on here. But in any case, this is what they did. And it's not in this environment with the opposition of Elon Musk to everything woke, the amount of power he has over the purse strings of US government, you should expect IRI to be defunded as well. I mean, you shouldn't you? But we haven't heard quite as much about them as we have heard about the National Endowment for Democracy, or specifically USAID. I don't know if that's because they're Republican or what. The hypocrisy of Tom Cotton and these other figures who are massive culture warriors in the U.S., but are tactically woke in Southeast Asia, is on clear display now. And I want to shout out Mike Benz, who went on Joe Rogan today, I guess it was earlier today, and referenced a lot of the material at the Grayzone that we've been doing, a lot of the investigative reporting that we've been doing on USAID, using culture, artists. He talked about our work on Bangladesh, but he also talked about my investigation into USAID in Cuba. And this is coming from the right. This is not someone who supports the Cuban. Benz goes on, and he goes on for about an hour about the role of USAID, which is a partner of NED and IRI and the other subsidiaries, in using art, culture, rappers. They funded a rapper named, I think, Tawfiq Ahmed in Bangladesh through the IRI to promote regime change and destabilize governments and to exploit groups that are, in the words of USAID, referring to Cuba, desocialized youth. Here's the article he's referring to, by the way. It's called Cuba's Cultural Counter-Revolution. U.S. government-backed rappers, artists gain fame as catalyst for current unrest. And this surveys the whole history of USAID in Cuba, working with the burgeoning rap culture there, even paying rap promoters and basically putting on concerts inside Cuba behind the cover of Spanish and other rap promoters to make this more popular among Cuban youth. And it led to a brief series of protests in Cuba that were an obvious attempt at a regime change-oriented color revolution. So this is getting out into the mainstream. I think it's the first time that the work that we've been doing since I started the Grayzone as an independent entity in late 2018 on USAID, NED. It's the first time that we're really getting so much traction in the mainstream, and it's under a Trump or a right-wing Trump administration. It's so strange. Not just traction, but we're seeing real material results.
Yeah, well, and I think we'll be saying that on a lot of the issues we've covered, including also Russiagate, which again we were pretty much alone in challenging, and all the other national security state scams and deceptions that we've challenged. Eventually, these things can't be contained forever, and the truth gets out, and that's what we're seeing now with the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID. And the fact that the NED was targeted at Cuba, as you talked about earlier, the NED traditionally going after left-wing movements around the world, it shows the lie and like the ridiculousness of Musk's claiming that the NED and USAID are tools of the far left.
Yeah.
No, they're the tools of the centrist, or whatever you want to call it, neocon establishment, uniparty, bipartisan establishment in Washington that's been targeting leftist and socialist leaning movements around the world for decades now. It's the tool of people like this. Victoria Nuland, who's worked for both Republican and Democratic administrations, who was recently named to the board of directors of the NED after leaving her position in the Biden administration, where one of her main tasks was fueling the Ukraine proxy war after helping to back a coup there. That's who the NED is a tool of. So this claim from Musk that this is like and Trump as well, that this is from the far left. No, this has been used by people like Victoria Nuland to go after the left around the world and to undermine any possibility of a left-leaning government having a chance at taking power by destroying and destabilizing their societies.
Yeah, they don't understand the difference. And it's a deliberate obfuscation, like when the Tea Party would call Obama a socialist for his free market healthcare plan, for example. That was basically a boon to Kaiser Permanente.
Written by Mitt Romney, basically.
Yeah, based on Mitt Romney's plan when he was governor of Massachusetts. But you have to look deeper into NED to understand that it was funded by people who came out of the Socialist Party USA. Carl Gershman was a Socialist Party USA operative. Gene Kirkpatrick was as well. And these people became the neocons. They founded the base. They were the basis of the neocons. Before that, Carl Gershman was a foreign policy aide or sort of advisor to Max Shachtman, who was the leader of the Trotskyist movement in the US that supported the Cold War. And like, these are the people that inspired parties like the ISO, the International Socialist Organization, which has now folded itself into the DSA, which attacked us relentlessly over Syria, supported regime change in Syria. They support regime change. They supported, the Ukraine proxy war. They believe that like the US is an engine for continual revolution, and that the NED, by funding all these groups and promoting freedom, is actually creating revolution. At the Socialist Conference last year, the one in Chicago that Amy Goodman always speaks at, which was the gathering every year of the ISO, an active duty Ukrainian soldier appeared to talk about how Ukraine is fighting for the international left. And what these people represent is what the CIA would call the NCL, or the non-communist left. And that's what the CIA supported when they supported the Paris Review, or the Congress on Cultural Freedom, which was exposed by ramparts on campuses and elsewhere. Gloria Steinem was a leader of it. Is they were supporting basically social democrats who did not oppose imperialism. Yeah. You have the NCL, and then you have like Marxist-Leninists who oppose imperialism. And that's what the CIA has really always sought to neutralize, both domestically in the US and abroad, and especially in Europe during the Cold War. And like Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, he really represents the fruit of that effort by the CIA to support the NCL, the non-communist left. And Mike Benz talked about how the CIA would sponsor these cultural conventions of youth. Gloria Steinem would lead them in Europe, of the NCL, to counter the World Youth Communist movement, which the Soviet Union backed, and their massive cultural youth extravaganzas in Europe. And they would even bring out jazz musicians like Louis Armstrong until he realized he was being used by a racist government. It's the same today. Another reason they supported the NCL, by the way, was also to prevent the rise of figures that actually inspired Trumpism, like James Burnham and Pat Buchanan, who come from the kind of isolationist right. So this history is something I've sort of been obsessed with for years, because it really helps me understand why we're in the position we're in the US, where there really is no left, that a coherent, cohesive left outside the Democratic Party that can oppose imperialism in a meaningful way, why socialism is so weak inside the United States, and why it looks like the only traction we've ever been able to get at this movement has come from that part of the right that the neocons have always tried to stifle for so many years. And so the neocons have really suffered the greatest blow from the right while finding traction on the left. And kind of leaves us out in the wilderness, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been happening for a long time. And again, Russiagate played a big part in this. I don't want to get into the tangent, but just enlisting people in a conspiracy theory based on, Cold Warrior jingoism, and this idea that Russia's an enemy, and that therefore anyone who opposes militarism with Russia is a threat to democracy. This whole appropriation of democracy jargon to basically demonize people who favor diplomacy and don't want to have proxy wars abroad. It's been very successful, and the left has never been weaker in my lifetime. And to me, that was exemplified when every single progressive member of Congress got up and voted for tens of billions of dollars to fund a proxy war in Ukraine. And every single time. They had multiple opportunities to vote no, and they didn't. And those of us who have not gone along with that have been very, very marginalized. And maybe now, with more sunlight on some of these groups that have been involved in propagandizing Americans, like the NED, which is not just used to destabilize countries abroad, but is used to propagandize Americans by, propping up voices that are deemed to be authentic representatives of countries we're trying to destabilize, like Ukraine. So bringing on Ukrainian voices, like Democracy Now! Did, that oppose any diplomacy and want to have continued war. Hopefully now, with all that being exposed, people will wake up to the fact that they've been duped and lied to, and enlisted in really evil things in the name of so-called freedom and democracy and respecting the agency of foreign peoples whose societies we're actually helping to destroy.
Well, I think we're going to be wading through a sea of lies for the next 4 years. And I just am going to continue to I'm not going to be able to locate myself on the political spectrum in the U.S. in such a clear way. But I think we're, just seeing the tip of the iceberg with the attack on NED, USAID. Elon Musk is going to move towards the Department of Education. He's going to move towards social programs. His model is what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina. And it's not going to be, it's going to be increasingly obvious that it's about channeling money. It's going to be about channeling money back to the billionaire class. It's not going to be about saving taxpayers' money. But right now, these targets, USAID, part of it was motivated by revenge from the Trump administration. The NED was such a clear, easy target. It's, I'll take victories when they come. But politically, the U.S. is not, it's following a process that we've been on, or a trajectory we've been on since the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was just destroyed by the West and from within, including by many CIA assets, and wasn't able to reform itself. It was pretty clear that the U.S., in taking on this role of unipolar domination, was going to go to the right, to the corporatist right. And we're seeing the kind of culmination of that process now, with a billionaire effectively running government. I mean, we've had billionaires running government since the Bush era, maybe before, certainly millionaires since the Reagan era, but it's so naked. It's so obvious what's taking place now. And I'm bracing for the worst. The Democrats, the opposition they're going to put up, well, we saw what they did in the first Trump term. It was Russiagate. It was McCarthyism. It was pushing for more war. The Democrats listed, the Democratic National Committee listed the Democrats' accomplishments in the past week, 5 of them on Twitter yesterday. Number one was everybody voted against Tulsi Gabbard. I don't believe
including Bernie Sanders, who once praised Tulsi Gabbard, in part because Tulsi Gabbard risked her career to defend Bernie Sanders when the Democratic Party was conspiring against him. She resigned from the DNC, called out the corruption against him, along with taking progressive positions that Bernie Sanders has long echoed as well. And what does Bernie Sanders do? After voting for Marco Rubio, to confirm Marco Rubio, Bernie Sanders voted to confirm Marco Rubio, with whom I'm confident Bernie Sanders shares close to 0 positions. He voted against Tulsi Gabbard, which just shows that despite being an independent, he's acting like a partisan hack. And one could maybe argue, well, Bernie Sanders, one could maybe say, well, Tulsi Gabbard's taken an unconscionable position on Palestine. She smeared anti-genocide protesters. So therefore, everyone should vote against her. Okay. But you can't make that argument if you're Bernie Sanders, because he voted to confirm Marco Rubio, career neocon Marco Rubio. So Bernie voting for Tulsi Gabbard to me was just such
against.
Say it again.
Against Tulsi Gabbard.
Bernie voting against Tulsi Gabbard was just another reminder that Bernie is not guided by principles. The same Bernie Sanders that also voted for the Ukraine proxy war, that said he defers to Joe Biden's judgment on that, who early on, his comments were used by AIPAC to promote Israel's genocide because Bernie Sanders was arguing against reaching a ceasefire with Hamas. That's unfortunately what the left has become in the U.S. And I keep hoping people will
it goes back to my long rant about the CIA funding the NCL. I'm not saying Bernie's a CIA asset, although I don't know how hostile he is to them. It's just that's the kind of leftist you get in the US. That's the only acceptable leftist, is one who is willing to cede all or most opposition to US empire and outsource his brain to a mediocre think tank lanyard like Matt Duss. That's he's like a social democrat. Go back to Michael Parenti's comments on Bernie, and knowing Bernie, how Michael Parenti knew him for all those years. But Bernie supported the war on Yugoslavia. He voted for the war on Libya. He was never really out in front in opposing the crimes of empire. And that's what we're left with. And Bernie himself is kind of extinguished. There is no clear successor. Like you've got Kyle Kulinski and Crystal Ball promoting Stephen A. Smith as the, great bloviating hope of the Democratic Party.
From ESPN?
That guy. They're literally, I don't know if they're like, it's like some hustle and they want to be like his consultants and get him to run some vanity campaign. That's like the level that the Democrats were at. By the way, number 3 on the Democrats' list of accomplishments for the week was like preventing fluoride from being removed from the water in some random municipality in the U.S. So like that's what they're achieving.
Well, I don't have a strong position on fluoride, but
no, it's not.
It's
not about whether you want fluoride in the water or not. It's like that's what you're fighting.
What I do know is that House Republicans just released their budget, and they want cuts of something like $880 billion from the part of the government that funds Medicaid, which to me is a signal that they're going to target Medicaid, despite Trump's promises. And my hope is that this time, if they care about being an actual opposition party, they'll focus on policies like that, which are horrible for working people, rather than channeling resistance energy into scams like Russiagate, or now defending the sanctity of the National Endowment for Democracy and other programs, regime change programs that Musk has been cutting. If Republicans are actually going after Medicaid, that's a major affront on working people. And that's the kind of priority that an actual genuine progressive movement would take up, along with not trying to destroy the rest of the world, which has been the Democrats' pastime for a long time now, as they've ceded their foreign policy wing to neocons. So I don't think they've learned anything at all from Trump's multiple victories, from the collapse of Russiagate, from the fact that the Ukraine proxy war is now looks like it's winding down. But I keep hoping to be proven wrong.
We're unfortunately right a lot. We're unfortunately vindicated. We haven't been able to talk about Syria much tonight. Here's, just going back to USAID before we go. Just some memories of USAID. The plaque on the Ronald Reagan building of the United States Agency for International Development has been removed. Oh, you know what they should go after is the the U.S. Department of, it's not the Department of Peace, it's the U.S. Institute for Peace.
Oh yeah.
It's this fake regime change front that has a giant building across from the State Department that does literally nothing. I don't know why they don't just like clear that one out.
The head of that for a while, or one of the executives, was William Taylor, the former top U.S. envoy in Ukraine, who spent his time trying to tell Zelensky not to implement the Minsk Accords and to lobby for more weapons to Ukraine. And that was one of the executives at the so-called U.S. Institute for Peace.
Yeah, it was so funny. I wish we had prepared for this, but to have William Taylor on MSNBC thundering for more weapons to Ukraine, for F-16s and long-range ATACMS missiles to strike deep inside Russia, and then the Chiron reads director, U.S. Institute for Peace. Just like, I will not call it Orwellian because that's played out, but that's what they are. And then here's USAID's, here's some nostalgia for USAID from one of the biggest psychopaths to ever serve in a U.S. government that has been filled with them for centuries.
I might say I've got some personal experience here. I was in charge of policy and budget at USAID during the Reagan administration when we undertook a major effort to fix it. And I'm going to show you my farewell present from AID. You can see it's a hand grenade, and it says on it, John R. Bolton, truest Reaganomics, AID 1983. This is a style of government. And that's the way we approached it.
Well, I thought they were a life-saving organization. That's what the New York Times says in every headline. Life-saving organization, USAID. Why did they give him a grenade? Like, what was he talking about inside the office? I think you're muted now.
A lot of people in our chat making the same comment.
Pull
the pin. And Eva, you are joined by many people in the chat making the same comment. So you speak for many. Yeah, that's an amazing clip. Wow. I didn't know that John Bolton used to be at USAID, but of course he was. Of course this veteran neocon bureaucrat was at a neocon wing of the U.S. establishment, getting a grenade, a commemorative grenade for his services. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And John Bolton, by the way, is apoplectic about Trump's new overtures to Russia and talking about ending the war. John Bolton's been making the rounds on CNN and freaking out about that. So look, in a world where it's hard to find good news, and of course the moral issue of our time remains the Gaza Holocaust, which Trump is 100% now complicit in, continuing essentially the policies of genocide Joe Biden. In a very grim world, sometimes there still can be some positive developments, and Trump talking about peace with Russia over Ukraine, pulling funding for the NED, these, despite all the other horrors of the Trump administration, are positive things.
I got to do this for 2 minutes. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the Trump administration is trying to satisfy the public's suspicions around Epstein, JFK, and UFOs, while refusing to just release all the documents. And it's a potentially insidious initiative to create a committee on Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, who is someone who is very close to Donald Trump and reputed to be a Mossad asset, an asset of Israeli intelligence, running blackmail rings. JFK's assassination, which was said to involve the Cuban Miami mafia, the mafia. Some people think, hey, even the Mossad could have been behind that as well. I'm not subscribing to that theory. And then UFOs, they seem to be introduced to, so much talk about UFOs in the last 2 years. Marco Rubio's pushing it to develop new advanced weapons systems. And look who's in charge of the committee. It is someone who calls themselves Anna Paulina Luna. And she says she will bring in members of the Earl Warren Commission as part of her JFK investigation.
What sort of witnesses will you expect to have at your hearings? Some of these, the first ones in March, that department heads, former employees of various agencies.
Yeah, I was going to say, based on what we're actually looking to do with the JFK investigation, I'm looking to actually bring in some of the attending physicians at the initial assassination, and then also people that had been on the various commissions looking into, like the Warren Commission looking into the initial assassinations. There's been conflicting evidence, and I think that even the FBI at the time reported some anomalies in the initial autopsy at Bethesda, Maryland. All of those, though, seem to have been rinsed and repeated in the media to push a certain narrative that we don't agree with. And so I think
so yeah, she's going to bring people who've been dead for a long time to testify, maybe with a Ouija board. This doesn't seem like a serious commission on JFK's assassination. Lauren Boebert's also on the commission. Anna Paulina Luna is not someone who's going to probe very deeply into any Trump connection to Epstein, and certainly not any Israel connection. This is her on the House floor with Benjamin Netanyahu. She loves Israel. She's a huge Israel shill. She's sort of a plant from the conservative AstroTurf organization Turning Point USA of Charlie Kirk, which is funded heavily by Zionist billionaires. Charlie Kirk has, been taken on trips to Israel. It is just conservative incorporated personified. And, as part of her attempt to ingratiate herself with Zionist donors, Anna Paulina actually claimed to be of Jewish heritage. And this is hilarious because she actually got embarrassed in the Israeli media grandfather of GOP lawmaker claiming Jewish heritage, fought for the Nazis. So says that she's a Messianic Jew. Her father's name was George Meyerhofer, and she said he was a drug addict. And she said she's also a small fraction Ashkenazi. Members of her extended family told the Washington Post that Luna's father was Catholic, not a Messianic Jew, and that they'd never heard of him embracing any form of Judaism. He moved to Canada, of course. Canada took in so many Nazis from Germany in 1954, and his immigration record identified him as Roman Catholic. There's a lot more about her that's come out that raises serious questions about her credibility and what's going on here. But this commission on JFK, I mean, it's hard to take it seriously. I think they're also going to investigate the MLK assassination. It's hard to really take it seriously with these people at the top. And what they could simply do is just release documents instead of reviewing documents and let us do the rest. As WikiLeaks did, except they attempted to actually redact the names of certain assets before Luke Harding dropped the password. So we'll be watching that. I'll try to get Anya on to, me and Aaron can't just be attacking we can't be shaming Anna Paulina Luna. It just doesn't feel right.
Well, I mean, I know of her because she introduced a measure once to censure Adam Schiff, and I think to even expel him from Congress or something. So that's how that's how I first heard of her, and so I thought she was one for one back then. But I can't speak to all this. I don't follow it too closely. I do think, I mean, people who are waiting on the release of these JFK documents, I think no matter what you think about what happened, you're in for a letdown, because I just don't. If there was something really damning explosive, don't you think it would have been scrubbed by now after so many years? Given the significance of this case, and I've made my views on this known, and no need to get into it. But I suspect no matter what comes out, people will be disappointed. Say it again.
You take the Chomsky view on JFK.
I take the Chomsky, having read Chomsky's Rethinking Camelot and Seymour Hersh's The Dark Side of Camelot. I just don't see JFK as the peacemaker that people think he is, and therefore I don't see a deep state conspiracy in his assassination, because I don't think he was ending the Vietnam War, contrary to popular belief. But I look forward to the release of these documents, and if I'm wrong, I will happily apologize for it.
It's funny, like the committee head is like being promoted as the first Mexican American to serve from Florida, has kind of a dubious AstroTurf background, changed her name to Luna. It's not her husband's name, and her father's name is Meyerhoff. And the Republicans are against DEI. And, Pete Hegseth, not the most talented individual. He's sort of following orders right now on NATO. I don't know if you couldn't call it DEI, maybe DUI. I don't know. But it's good to see Republicans having fun. It's not like the Bush era. Anyway, we'll see you all next week. I guess this is where we get off. There's going to be a huge amount to talk about. I'd actually wanted to get Ali Abunimah on, but it's too late where he is. He's in Jordan right now. But I want to get his take on everything we discussed vis-a-vis Gaza, Jordan, Egypt, etc. So maybe next week we'll do that with a guest. But yeah, look for us here next week. Subscribe, sign up for our newsletter on our website, or you can sign up for our Substack and you'll get everything in your inbox every day, or you get a roundup every week. And like this stream, we're heavily suppressed on YouTube and demonetized. So like this, and subscribe to our channel. Support us however you see fit. And thanks for being here. Peace.
Peace.